March of 1940. Britain is slowly being choked, not by bombs dropping on London or tanks sweeping across the countryside, but by something much worse. The Atlantic Ocean's frigid, black waters are where ships disappear without a sound. Every week, another convoy leaves ports in North America carrying food, gasoline, medicine, and raw materials. And each week, fewer ships come back. The numbers tell a scary story. In the first 4 months of 1940, German U-boats sank more than 250 Allied ships, the bottom of the Atlantic. That's not just numbers on a naval chart. That's a lot of food that will never make it to British tables, fuel that will never be used in British factories, and sailors who will never go home again. Britain needs to bring in over 55 million tons of goods per year merely to stay alive. The island nation barely grows around 30% of its own food. The country will starve in a few months without those convoys. Admiral Karl Donitz was in charge of Germany's U-boat fleet, knows exactly what he is doing. He's gotten the Wolfpack strategy just right. Groups of submarines working together to hunt, plan their attacks, and take down convoy escorts. His U-boat doesn't play fair. They attack at night, coming up from below and attacking in the dark, where British ASDIC sonar can't see them. In a matter of minutes, one torpedo may sink a vessel that weighs 10,000 tons. If the crew is lucky, they might have time to get off the ship before the icy water of the Atlantic takes them. British convoy commanders face impossible decisions on every trip. Sail faster and leave the slower merchant ships behind. Zigzag to escape torpedoes but waste gasoline. Stay close to each other for safety, but make a greater target. Every choice might mean life or death for hundreds of men. Winston Churchill, who became Prime Minister in May 1940, will later remark that the U-boat threat was the only thing that actually scared him during the war. Take a time to think about that. This is a man who is about to be invaded by the Nazis, the Blitz, and the collapse of France, and the quiet hunters that roam beneath the waters keep him up at night. By the spring of 1940, Britain's commerce fleet is dying faster than shipyards can build new ones. The Royal Navy is stretched too thin to protect the homeland, escort convoys, and hunt at the same time. Destroyer captains are rushing their ships into the ground as they race from one convoy to the next. There are never enough escorts to go around. Some convoys simply have 1 or 2 battleships accompanying them, which protects 30 or 40 ships that carry goods. And this is what makes things worse. The German submariners are becoming more daring. Now they work together, sharing information and summoning in their packmates when they see a convoy. During the day, one U-boat would follow the commerce ships and send radio reports on their positions. Then, at night, 5 or 6 submarines would come together to kill everyone in a planned way. British sailors begin to name this time the pleasant time, but that's what the Germans call it. For the U-boat teams, it's practice shooting. It's a nightmare for the Allies. The Wolfpacks aren't even the worst thing going on in Britain right now. While Churchill and his admirals are worried about the U-boat menace, another killer is hiding in the water. One that doesn't hunt in groups, doesn't need a crew, and attacks ships in places where they should be safe. The 21st of November, 1939. The British destroyer HMS Gypsy is sailing through the Tempames estuary, which is just off the coast of England. These waterways don't belong to the enemy. The Royal Navy has scoured this channel for mines dozens of times. It's almost like Britain's front yard. Then, out of nowhere, a huge explosion rips through the ship's hull. It only takes a few minutes for Gypsy to go down. There was no torpedo wake, no periscope sighting, and no warning at all. It happens again 3 days later. The commercial ship SS Tarauni Maru blows up in the same place. Then one more and one more. Ships are blowing up in harbours, river mouths, and coastal areas that should be safe. The explosions are terrible. All of bows peeled off, ships snapped in half, and men died right away. More than a dozen ships have gone missing in British waters by early December 1939, and no one knows why. The Admiralty is confused. These aren't attacks with torpedoes. There is no proof that submarines are active in these shallow, well-guarded locations. These aren't regular contact mines either. British minesweepers have gone over these paths many times and found nothing. Ships are just sailing along, doing their jobs, and then suddenly disappearing in a fountain of water and twisted metal. Panic is starting to set in among British shipping. Captains who battled U-boat in the Atlantic without fear are now afraid to go into their home ports. At least with an U-boat, you know what you're up against. You can zigzag, send out escorts, and drop depth charges. But this is like fighting a ghost. The Thames estuary is now known as the death trap by the crews. Some merchant captains flat out not sail across some channels even when told to do so. The losses kept getting worse through December and into January 1940. The British battleship HMS Nelson, which weighs 45,000 tons, hits something off the coast of Scotland, and barely makes it to port with its bow almost blown off. If major ships aren't safe, nothing is. The Royal Navy doesn't even know what's killing the ships in Britain's ports, which are turning into graveyards. After that, the break comes. A few days after HMS Gypsy sank on November 23, 1939, at low tide, people saw a German plane dumping something by parachute into the mudflats near Schubes. When the tide goes out, British bomb disposal experts carefully go closer. What they find changes everything. It's a mine. But the Royal Navy has never seen one like it before. No visible detonation mechanism or contact horns. It looks like it's not dangerous at all, just resting there in the dirt. Lieutenant Commander John Goode and his team spend hours carefully looking at it, knowing that one false step may kill them and the answer to the riddle of Britain. They race against time while working with frigid water lapping at their feet as the tide rushes back in. What they find inside sends shockwaves through the Admiralty. This mine doesn't wait for a ship to hit it. It doesn't need to touch anything at all. There is something far worse within the case, a magnetic sensor that picks up the metal hulls of ships that pass by. When a ship sails above, the mine senses the magnetic field of all that steel and iron, explodes. The Germans have made physics into a weapon. All of a sudden, everything makes terrible sense. The shallow water attacks, the explosions in the harbour, and the minesweepers sailing right over the armaments without setting them off. Britain is no longer merely fighting submarines. It's fighting an unseen enemy that makes the metal hull of every ship a death sentence. A magnetic mine that was caught ends up on the desk of a man who shouldn't be in the Royal Navy at all. Charles Goode is a chemist from Canada, professor who came to Britain on a scholarship to study before the war. He isn't in the military. He doesn't design ships. He is a scientist who got caught up in Britain's desperate race to have every available brain working against the Nazis. The admiral. T makes the Department of Miscellaneous Weapons Development in late 1939. It's basically a place where strange ideas and the individuals who come up with them can go. Goode fits in perfectly. When the problem gets to his office in early 1940, most naval officers are still thinking in the same old way. Make minesweepers that work better. Make the hull plating stronger. Be more careful when you map the minefields. These are smart, rational things to do from a sailor with a lot of experience. Goode looks at the situation in a whole new way. He knows something that the admirals don't. This isn't a problem for the Navy. It's a difficulty in physics. The mine doesn't care how thick the armor is or how the spacecraft is built. It reacts to magnetic fields. In a way, every ship is just a big magnet that floats in the ocean. When building, steel hulls become magnetic. The hammering, welding, and shaping of metal all line up the iron molecules in the magnetic field of the Earth. This magnetic signature stays with a ship even after it leaves the dock. And that signature is what's killing the crews. When Goodeve initially suggests his approach, it sounds completely crazy. He wants to cover whole ships with electrical wire and run electricity through them. A lot of feet of wire wrapped around holes powered by generators on board. This generated an electromagnetic field that would cancel out the ship's natural attraction. He wants to make ships invisible to magnets. The Admiralty's first reaction is what you would expect. A university lecturer is telling senior military officers who have been at sea for 30 years that they need to transform their battleships into floating electromagnets. People think he's kidding. A lot of people think he's wasted their time. One admiral is said to have asked Goode whether he had been drinking, but Goodeve has the math to prove it. He says that every magnetic field has two poles, north and south. When you make a field around the ship's hull that is equal and opposite to the one that is already there, the two cancel each other out. It's like noise-cancelling headphones, but instead of sound waves, you're cancelling magnetic fields. The mine's senses would not be able to see the ship. It would go straight over the weapon and the magnetic trigger would never go off. There's just one small issue. No one has ever tried this on anything bigger than a small boat. Goodeve is trying to trick. That's the technical name for it, which comes from the unit of magnetic field strength. Every ship in the British fleet, from battleships to destroyers, cargo ships, to tankers and trawlers, needs its own set of calculations, accurate wire arrangement, and meticulous calibration. The logistics are mind-boggling, and Britain doesn't have time. Every day ships are blowing up. The magnetic mines are spreading to all of the main shipping lanes around the British Isles. U-boat are already sinking ships that are out in the open water. Ships can't even get to port safely anymore. There might not be a fleet left to save if the Royal Navy spends months testing and talking about Goodeve's idea. Even though people were skeptical, the assignment was huge. and it sounded like something out of a science fiction book. The Admiral lets Goodeve try. They don't have any better choices. You have to put everything on the wild concept sometimes in combat. Here's why the magnetic mine is so smart. The Earth is a huge magnet with lines of magnetic field that go from the North Pole to the South Pole. When you build a ship, hammering steel plates, welding joints, and bending metal into shape, you're doing all of this work in the magnetic field of the Earth. The iron molecules in the steel slowly line up with that field like little compass needles, all pointing in the same way. The ship gets a magnetic signature, which means it stays magnetized. The strongest part of this signature occurs at the ends of the ship, the bow and stern, where the hull curves the most. From 30 feet away, you can feel the magnetic field of a standard 10,000-ton cargo ship. Battleships, which have even stronger steel armor, are even stronger. The field doesn't turn off after the crew leaves. It doesn't vanish in the dark or fog. It's always there, shining from the hull like a beacon that shouts, "Detonate here to any magnetic mine within range." The German engineers who created the weapon knew exactly what they were doing. The mine is quiet and patient on the bottom of the sea. A magnetometer, which is just a sensitive compass, checks the magnetic field around it inside its waterproof case. The magnetometer picks up the abrupt shift in field strength when a ship passes overhead. After that change, when the current reaches a certain level, an electrical circuit closes, sending current to the detonator. This turns the seafloor into a killing zone with 650 pounds of powerful explosives. From Germany's point of view, the design is beautiful since it can't be made sweeter. Mines that are not in use float on the surface or slightly below it, held in place by wires. Minesweepers can cut those wires or blow up the mines with gunfire. But magnetic mines are right on the bottom in shallow water. Minesweepers soaring overhead just set off them like any other boat. This is how Britain lost a lot of minesweepers before they discovered out what was going on. Goodeve's Degaussing solution goes right to the heart of the problem. You can cancel out the ship's magnetic field if you can't hide its metal. To use this method, you need to wrap the spacecraft in a large cable loop, sometimes just one loop around the whole hull. Sometimes there are more than one loop at different heights. This wire makes its own magnetic field as electricity runs through it. The secret is getting the polarity right, as scientist Hans Christian Ørsted found out in 1820. If the hole in the ship has a magnetic north pole at the front, you send current through the dead cable in the opposite direction to make a south pole at the same spot. The two fields work together to cancel each other out. If you do this well all the way around the hull, the ship's magnetic signature goes down from 30 feet to just a few inches. Not strong enough to set off the mine's sensors. But this is when things become tricky. No two ships are the same. A warship made in Glasgow has a distinct magnetic signature than a freighter made in Newcastle. The intensity changes depending on the type of steel used, how the ship was built, when it was built, and even which way it was facing at the shipyard. You can't just put a regular cable around each boat and be done. Every ship needs its own measurements, calculations, and calibrations that are just right. Goode knows that he's not just fixing an issue in physics. He wants to change the way ships are built for all of the British commerce and Navy fleets. And he needs to do it in weeks, not years. The first test takes place in January 1940 at HMS Vernon, the Royal Navy's School for Torpedoes and Mines in Portsmouth. Goode and his team use HMS board, a little minesweeper, as their test subject. They use sensitive magnetometers that they obtained from university physics departments to measure the ship's magnetic field from every aspect for 3 days. Then they carefully wrap 2,000 feet of heavy electrical cable around the hole in a certain way, link it to a generator and flip the switch. The results are amazing. The ship's magnetic signature goes down by more than 90%. When they cruise HMS over test magnetic sensors, the detectors hardly pick up anything. It seems like the spacecraft has disappeared from the magnetic spectrum. Goodeve's wacky concept really does work, but success brings its own problems. One test ship shows that the idea works. Britain has more than 9,000 merchant ships, as well as hundreds of Royal Navy warships, destroyers, cruisers, battleships, and other support ships. If they want to make it through British seas, they all need to be de-ossed. And ships keep coming every day. American freighters, Canadian escorts, requisition trawlers, and cargo ships built in an emergency. The line keeps getting longer. Goode does the math, and it's scary. It takes about 2,000 feet of thick copper cable for each ship. That's more than 18 million feet of cable just for the merchant fleet. It would be enough to go all the way around the equator of the Earth. Britain's copper supplies are already stretched thin since they are used to make weapons, support electrical infrastructure, and make planes. Goodeve now needs a whole new supply chain only to deose the cable. Then there's the problem with putting it in. You can't just hire any random electrician to do this job. It is important that the cables are in the right area. The wrong position and the Degaussing field won't appropriately stop the magnetization of the hull. If you use too much current, you could spark a fire or break electrical systems. Not enough, and the ship is still at risk. Each installation needs trained workers who know both naval architecture and electrical engineering. Britain doesn't have those kinds of individuals. The country is at war on several fronts. All certified engineers are already working 16 hours a day on radar, aircraft engines, gun systems, or coding. Goode needs to make an full Degaussing, train them in weeks, and send them to shipyards all throughout Britain, and eventually to ports around the world that are friendly to the UK. The Admiralty sets up Degaussing stations at important ports like Portsmouth, Liverpool, Glasgow, Belfast, and Cardiff. Each station gets magnetometers, cables, and technical workers that have been educated quickly. As soon as a ship arrives in port, it is measured. People do math, put cable around holes, and set up generators. If everything goes well, the complete procedure takes roughly 48 hours each ship. Everything goes well. It never goes exactly as planned. Ships come in damaged from attacks, therefore they need to be fixed before they can even start Degaussing. Shipments of cable are late, generators stop working. Workers make mistakes when they measure things and have to start over. And despite all of this, U-boat are still searching outside the harbours, waiting for Degaussed ships to come out and join convoys going into the Atlantic. Goode knows he needs to find a speedier way to deal with the huge backlog of ships. His team creates a simpler method named wiping. Ships slowly pass by a shore installation where huge electromagnets briefly cancel out their magnetic fields. It doesn't last forever like genuine Deg, but it does last for a few weeks. Wiping stations are being built at the entrances to the harbour, which will allow them to process more than one ship every 2 days. By March 1940, Britain is sinking ships faster than Germany can deploy magnetic mines, but it's a race against time. Everything becomes speed. Goodeve's operation goes from being a small test run program into the biggest crash engineering project ever in the UK. Degaussing stations are working around the clock by April 1940. 3 shifts a day, 7 days a week. At midnight, welding torches make sparks fly. Electricians who are tired measure magnetic fields at morning. Cable personnel operate through air raids, even when sirens are going off. Every hour a ship has to wait to unload is an hour it can't bring in supplies that are badly needed. The Admiralty gets workers from anywhere they can get them. Electricians who have retired are asked to come back to work. Students of physics at universities are taken right from class. Women are joining Deg teams in record numbers, using magnetometers and figuring out cable routes, work that needs accuracy and numerical skills, not muscle. By the summer of 1940, more than 3,000 individuals are working in degaussing jobs all around Britain. The logistics are crazy. Tons of cable come to ports on huge reels. Workers learn how to handle the heavy copper wire in specific ways. It weighs a few pounds per foot and is as thick as a man's thumb. To get it around the hull of a ship, crews have to be lowered on scaffolding along the sides of the ship, using brackets every few feet to hold the cable in place and ensuring the connections won't rust or leak in seawater. It takes a whole day of hard work to install aboard a big freighter. Then there's the testing. After installation, each ship must be measured again to make sure the dig. Ships leisurely steam through designated testing locations while shore-based magnetometers keep track of their signatures. If the readings are still too high, the crews go back and change the current, move the wires, and fix the system. Some boats need 3 or 4 tries before they are fully neutralized. The program goes beyond the bounds of Britain. Canada sets up degaussing stations in Montreal and Halifax. American ports, which were legally neutral until December 1941, discreetly built degaussing facilities for ships that would join British convoys. Gibraltar Allied shipping is concentrated in Alexandria, Cape Town, Bombay, and other places. Degaussing equipment follows. The team at Goodeve creates training guides, sends equipment to other countries, and teaches other personnel how to use it. But ships keep sinking. June 1940 brings disaster on several fronts. Germany takes over France, giving U-boat access to Atlantic ports like Brest and Lorient. This cuts their hunting range by 450 miles. Now, German submarines may stay on patrol for considerably longer and attack convoys that are farther away from British shores. And even if thousands of ships now have degaussing protection against magnetic mines, Although they are still exposed to torpedoes in open water, the Admiralty has to make very hard choices on who to save. Give priority to warships that are being decommissioned or merchant ships that are new or have been in service for years. Fast ships that could be able to outrun U-boats or slow cargo ships that carry the most weight. Every choice means that certain ships will have to wait longer, be more exposed, and take more risks. Goodeve's staff keep working through the Blitz. The docks in London are on fire from German bombing raids, yet Degaussing goes on. In May 1941, Liverpool is hammered hard. More than 2,000 individuals were killed, and the port's infrastructure was damaged, yet the Degaussing station is still running. Glasgow, Belfast and Cardiff all get bombed, yet cable crews keep wrapping ships. Britain had sunk more than 4,000 ships by the end of 1940. By the middle of 1941, that number is above 10,000. It's an engineering feat that rivals making the ships themselves, but it's being done under conditions of war with few resources, continual enemy action, and the realization that every delay costs lives at sea. The numbers describe the story better than any words could. In the first 3 months of 1940, before Degaussing became common, magnetic mines sank or damaged 115 British ships in their own waters. By the end of 1940, after thousands of ships had gotten Degaussing protection, the number lowers to fewer than 20 ships for the same 3-month period. In 1941, the number of ships lost to magnetic mines drops to nearly nothing, less than a dozen, for the whole year. Goode's ridiculous concept has pretty much taken away Germany's secret weapon. But getting ships away from magnetic mines is only half the battle. The Atlantic is still a place where people die. U-boat doesn't care if a ship is Degaussed or not. No matter what their magnetic fingerprints are, torpedoes will destroy hulls. And 1941 is the worst year of the whole Convoy war. By the end of the year, Dunnet will have more than 100 working U-boats, and his wolfpacks are tearing apart convoys with alarming speed. In November 1941, U-boat alone sinks 62 Allied ships that weigh more than 300,000 tons. But Degaussing provides convoys something they really need: predictability. Before, trade captains had to deal with threats from all sides at once, such magnetic mines in shallow water and air raids on the coast. There were no safe places along the way for ships to stop and rest from the time they left ports in North America until they docked in Britain. Daring takes away one variable. Now, convoys can only focus on the U-boat threat. There is no need for escort commanders to worry about ships blowing up near the harbour. Ships can take different paths through shallow coastal seas where submarines can't go, since magnetic mines are no longer a hazard there. Instead of spreading its defensive resources, ships, aircraft and radar stations across a lot of threats, the British can focus them on anti-submarine warfare. The effect on the mind is huge. Merchant crews who have seen ships blow up in what they thought were safe harbours now have trust that their Degaussed ships can really make it to port. The mood gets better. Sailors cease saying no to jobs. The persistent drumbeat of mysterious explosions that scare British ships in late 1939 and early 1940 just ceases. A lot of ships still sink, but at least the crews know what they're up against. By 1942, the degaussing effort is so common that naval reports hardly even mention it. Every ship gets painted and degaussed at the same time. Degaussing coils are used to build new ships, already put in the hull. 3 Liberty ships are built in the United States per day. Degaussing systems are standard equipment on all of them. In January 1940, it appeared impossible to safeguard the whole Allied fleet. By 1942, it was just a usual part of the job. The Germans try to change. They alter the magnetic mines to have more sensitive triggers, so they can try to find even the smallest ships. They put in acoustic sensors that pick up on the noise from the propeller. They use both pressure and magnetism detonators that need both a magnetic signature and a pressure wave from the front of the ship. But every change needs fresh mine manufacturing, new deployment, and Britain's minesweepers become much better at clearing the weapons now that they know how dangerous they are. The Battle of the Atlantic goes on until May 1945, and U-boats are dangerous until Germany gives up. But the fear of magnetic mines that almost stopped British shipping in 1940 never goes away. Goodeve's answer works. Ships continued crossing the Atlantic, bringing food, supplies, and troops to Britain. Not because they're invincible, but because they can be killed with one less weapon. Charles Goodeve never becomes well known. There are no monuments created in his honor. There are no Hollywood movies that make his accomplishments seem more important than it is. Code reekers at Bletchley Park and radar experts at Bodsey Manor are well known now that the war is over. But the man who saved thousands of ships and tens of thousands of lives is still mostly obscure outside of naval engineering circles. That happens a lot way war goes. The most important new ideas happen quietly, thanks to people you've never heard of, while the news focuses on wars and generals. But his work has effects that transcend far beyond World War II. Degaussing became the standard naval doctrine for all major navies across the world. Modern warships still utilize degaussing systems, but they have become advanced computer-controlled systems that change all the time to keep up with changing magnetic circumstances. Submarines have to stay hidden from magnetic anomaly detectors, use much better degaussing technology. The same rules protect cables that are under the water, scientific tools and delicate electronics from magnetic fields. Goode's legacy is bigger than just what he did. He didn't think like a Navy officer who had to follow the rules and use standard tactics. He thought like a scientist who knew that modern warfare was becoming more and more about fighting physics. Radar was making air battle like an electromagnetic chess game. Sonar was making submarine warfare agile of sound waves. And mines with magnets had turned Earth's magnetic field into a weapon. The person who best grasped and used scientific ideas would win. The Royal Navy was aware of this change. The Department of Miscellaneous Weapons Development, where Goodeve worked, became a permanent component of the government. Britain made it easier for academia and the military to work together. Scientists were no longer seen as strange outsiders. They became an important part of preparing for defense. Goode himself got up to be in charge of naval land equipment and then research and development for the Ministry of Supply. He was made a knight after the war and worked on scientific difficulties until he died in 1980. But the most significant thing I learned from the degree is how institutions can change when they are under stress. In 1940, the Royal Navy was one of the most traditional groups in history. Hundreds of years of rules, traditions, and ways of doing things. But when faced with when ships were blowing up and normal fixes weren't working, the Admiral handed a university professor with a crazy idea the power to rewire their whole fleet. It's not common for institutions to have that type of bravery. Consider what Britain did in less than 2 years. They took an idea, showed that it worked, made it operate for thousands of ships, trained thousands of workers, built infrastructure throughout the world, and basically solved a problem that might have starved the country. Give up. All of this was going on while they were fighting a war on several fronts, dealing with bombing attacks, the threat of invasion, and living in conditions of total hopelessness. The ships kept sailing. Britain made it through, and while degaussing was only one part, convoy tactics, escort carriers, long-range patrol aircraft, code reading, and plain old bravery were all very important. It got rid of one terrible threat right when Britain couldn't afford to lose anymore. The craziest concept in war is sometimes the proper one. Wrapping ships in miles of electrical wire and making them electromagnets is sometimes the only thing that can save a country. And sometimes the hero isn't the pilot in the cockpit or the admiral on the bridge. A Canadian chemistry professor who knew more about magnetism than anyone else imagined possible.